a sleepless bed, but you're wasting your time trying to lose the blues.
Hello, Ros McMullen. How lovely to see you. And I hope you don't mind us wasting a bit of your time this, well, I was going to say fine day, but it's a bit grey and grim here. It's grim down south, Ros. How is it up where you are?
It's grim. It was lovely yesterday, bright, cold, and sharp, but today a bit grim. I'll try and fit a bike ride in this afternoon, though, for the sake of my, health.
Well, it's that's a lovely start with grimness. And talking of grimness, can you tell me a bit about headrest, actually, to start with, because this is quite an important thing you're involved in.
Yes, headrest is something that Andrew Morrish and I decided was a service that we could, with some other colleagues, provide. Head teachers are under enormous pressure at the moment, really struggling, and it's only really people who have, as we call it, sat in the chair, who really understand the pressures of headship, and particularly at this time. So some of us who are recently retired and experienced are providing this pro bono service, which is completely free, completely confidential, where head teachers who just want to talk to somebody who understands, venting, checking out judgments, just somebody to talk to who understands. And we're providing this service at the moment. There's a free phone number that you ring or make contact through the website, and one of us calls you back. And we have special school heads, primary school heads, and secondary school heads experienced who are standing by to be a listening ear for heads at this time.
What kind of things have our heads worried about at the moment? I mean, it's some of this is obvious, but what's really uppermost in their minds, do you think?
Well, I think the main thing that we hear a lot about, and that I think is affecting all heads, is just the sheer, they're exhausted. I mean, they're just exhausted, but it's the sheer difficulties of everything is about COVID. So they're not, a lot of heads feel I'm unable to do the job I'm supposed to be doing, because all I am doing is the management of the COVID situation and the COVID crisis. And that puts a lot of stress on heads at a time when they are completely exhausted, dealing with lots and lots of difficult things and attempting to keep all the stress away from everybody else in their community. So heads are almost like a sponge, really, that is protecting everybody else, and that is just getting fuller and fuller and fuller, with all the worry of not being able to get to, their school improvement plans, their strategic plans and developments, because everything is just reacting to this really difficult situation. So just being able to talk to people who can understand exactly how that feels is a service we provide.
And do you think this is different around the country? I mean, is there more call for it in certain areas of the country where COVID is higher than others, perhaps?
I think it varies quite a bit. I mean, some heads have tremendous support networks within a multi-academy trust that they are working with, or with a local authority. Others less so. New head teachers are in a particularly difficult situation. Special school heads have different sets of challenges as well. So it varies, it varies. But I mean, I think basically headship is a tough job at the best of times. It's a great job, best job in the world, but it's tough. And it's very tough at the moment.
And do you see this being just through COVID times, or perhaps being something that could be there for perhaps ever?
Well, that's an interesting question. It's a response to the current situation, is why headrest has been set up. Whether there possibly is a longer term need for it. Yeah, possibly there is, but at the moment it's been a response to the particular pressures that heads are under at the moment.
And just to be clear about it, it's not just it. I mean, it's .co.uk. I mean, and it's UK based in that case. Is it England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, perhaps further afield even?
Another very interesting question. I think what I can say is I don't think we have had any calls outside of the UK. No. Well, I obviously don't deal with all the calls, but I'm pretty confident when I say we haven't had any outside of the UK.
Right. But it's UK based rather than just England.
Yes, and I'm just desperately trying, Martin, to think if we have spoken to anybody in Wales or Scotland or Northern Ireland, and I really can't tell you at this stage, but we certainly would be able to and willing to.
Good. So
And may have done.
well, hopefully you will get calls. I mean, it's difficult to say. Hopefully you'll get calls for this, of course, because you prefer it if no one had to. But it's great to have this sort of service out there, and I'm sure many heads will appreciate it. And the fact you're here talking about it makes it easier for them to pick up the phone.
Yeah, I mean, it was something that I felt. On the one hand, one felt extremely relieved not to be in operational headship at this time, but on the other hand, incredibly guilty that with all the experience, we actually wasn't in the sector anymore operationally. So what the hell can we do to support colleagues? And so I think that was why Headrest was born, really, was because we could see that as experienced head teachers, we had something that we could do to help others, and just felt very guilty about not still being in there and wanting to be able to provide that help. So that was sort of the motivation. And you're quite right. In one level, one would really love it if there wasn't a need for the service. But on the other hand, really pleased that people are finding the service of benefit.
Brilliant. And of course, one of the issues around headship at the moment, and certainly foremost in the mind perhaps of those in secondary education, is the issue around exams.
Mm.
And you've written a blog post this week, What I'm Learning About Disadvantage, Disparity and Disruption. Do you want to give us a flavour of what you're talking about in this blog post?
One of the things that has become very clear is that COVID is disproportionately affecting disadvantaged communities. So, in talking to, and this is not a headrest thing. This is just about all my networks. In talking to head teachers, it's really, really clear that the schools in the areas of the greatest disadvantage are the ones that are experiencing the most disruption. And that has provided layers and layers of disadvantage. So for kids who come from very disadvantaged backgrounds, their access to devices for online learning, to decent Wi-Fi, for places to study, support at home, and all of that stuff, the disparity between them and the kids who come from more advantaged backgrounds was just huge during that big lockdown from March to the end of the last academic year. Then when they go back to school, so already they've missed out so much. And then when they go back to school, those are the schools that are experiencing more closures, disruptions, bubbles collapsing, year groups being sent home. So when they're back to face-to-face learning, they're actually, again, suffering far more disruption to their education. So you've got all these layers of disadvantage that are being put on the already disadvantaged communities. And one of the things that I was one of the things that was making me very angry was just this blanket thing from government that exams are going to go ahead. Now, obviously, it would be great if exams could go ahead. Everybody would like exams to go ahead. But the problem is that not only may they not be able to do so, but actually this might be a very, very unfair way of treating young people and teachers during this crisis, because of all this disparity around the disruption and all the rest of it. So it seems to me that there needs to be a real lot of thought going into this, and a plan B needs to be being worked on, and it doesn't appear to be at all. And that made me very angry, because last year, when they came up with their damn stupid algorithm, there was no thought put into any alternatives that could have been more sensible. And when the Ofqual put out their consultation on what was going to happen to award grades, as soon as I read what the proposals were, it was completely obvious what was going to happen. And the consultation was ridiculous because it wasn't about whether or not they should do this. It was, we're going to do this, how should we do it? Should the exam officer do this and should somebody, nonsense. So I know at least one of their responses, because I was a co-author of it, didn't answer their damn silly questions, but did say to them, you shouldn't do this, because if you do this, this is what will happen. And of course, what we said would happen is exactly what did happen. And because no attention had been paid to any of the alternative ideas, we had to go with centre assessed grades. So there are now centre assessed grades that people don't have a great deal of confidence in because of lack of thought, because of lack of consideration, because things weren't discussed properly. We ended up in a mess. And the same thing appears to be happening now. Exams are going to go ahead. We have a lot of people saying exams have got to go ahead because there is no fairer way. Well, actually, how do we know that when we're not looking at it, when we're not considering it, when we're not talking to people and working it out? Because it isn't right to just say exams will go ahead. And also, it's left us not just with the disadvantaged kids. If exams do go ahead, these multiple layers of disadvantage are going to make it very, very unfair. But actually, saying that they're going to go ahead in a situation where nobody has total confidence that they will go ahead is actually leaving the worst of all possible worlds for teachers and students across the board, even people who are advantaged. And I'm acutely aware of that because my youngest daughter is actually in year 13 doing A-levels this year. And she's a very advantaged kid, of course she is. She's got access to multiple devices, she's got educated parents, she goes to a good school, very good school. But the situation that she's in is that she is believing or having to believe that exams will go ahead at the same time as having no confidence that they will. So every single piece of work she does now causes her enormous stress because she believes that actually that might be what she's going to be assessed on anyway. So, you've got the worst of all possible worlds for everybody, for the teachers, for the students, and then for the disadvantaged. If actually the certainty that we're supposed to have happens, there's all these multiple layers of disadvantage. And what my blog was really designed to say was, look, will you just stop with this? Think about it, and let's put some real thought into what the alternatives are so that we can give some degree of security really to our young people and to our teachers by saying, look, we'd like to say exams are going ahead, but if they don't, this is what we're going to do, and it will be fair. And also begin to give consideration to the fact that there are so many disadvantaged young people who really, they were never on a level playing field to start, but now, they're nowhere near the sports ground, let alone on a level playing field.
Yeah. I'm interested when you say everybody would like exams to go ahead. I'm not sure if that's entirely true. It's just whether you agree with me or not. Just try this out. Are there some people who perhaps are using this situation to say, well, exams are unfair anyway and shouldn't happen anyway, and we should have more continuous assessment and less testing in schools and things like that?
I think that's a whole other question. So, that is a whole other question. So, undoubtedly, there are the usual suspects, I would imagine, out there who will use anything as an excuse to say, we don't like examinations, we don't like accountability, we don't like grading kids, we don't like the way the system's going, so therefore don't do exams this year. Put that on one side. There is certainly a case for looking at reform. Of course, there's always a case for looking at reform, and I would certainly be part of thinking that we should be looking at some reforms anyway. But this isn't the time to do that. You don't use a crisis to look at something that needs a lot more thought than that. You look at the crisis to resolve the situation as it currently is. So And I think that it is quite likely, Martin, that some of the people who are saying exams must go ahead, we must do it, it's the fairest way, are actually responding not so much to the current situation, but to the people who are just anti-exam in any event. And that's what I don't like. I don't like people taking these polarized positions in response to something that needs much more nuanced, careful thought. And as you and I both know, it doesn't take you more than 5 minutes on Twitter in the education world to see that people like to put themselves in camps. They like to take polarized positions, and these things are not helpful. They're just not helpful, and it's certainly not helpful in the current crisis for that to happen.
And this is why longer thought pieces like your blog post, of course, are likely to help more than just the headlines on Twitter and the aphorisms shouted across the divides. Can I ask one thing? Would it be possible to iron out some of the discrepancies, certainly around poverty and perhaps geography, after the exams have been held? So when the results come through, if it's clear that there are wide gaps for some reason or other between performance as would be usually expected and which has actually happened, would that be a way of perhaps moving some of the way forward?
I think that's allowing a mess to happen and then trying to work out how to clear it up. And I don't think that's ever the most sensible thing to do. I mean, do you know what? I strongly suspect that that's what we're going to be left with. And I don't think it's sensible. I don't think seeing a car crash and thinking, well, we'll get the emergency services there after it's happened, I think let's try and prevent the car crash happening is a much more sensible way to go about it. And of course, the problem in doing that anyway, you'd get back to some of the problems that you had around this silly algorithm they tried to use last year, where what you're looking at is historic performance. And actually, that's not helpful, because that gets you back into the muddle of, this is how people in this area have always performed, therefore this is how they're going to perform this year. And it fills me with some horror and some alarm. I mean, I think that some of the things they should be looking at now is evidence around levels of disruption and what that means for the expected performance of the students. I mean, my suggestion last year, when they were coming out with that silly algorithm, my suggestion last year actually was, don't do that. Actually look at the centre assessed grades, but look at what schools were predicting the previous year against what they actually got. Not what historic performance of the cohorts of the schools were, but what schools were predicting against what they actually got. Because it is possible for us to see what a centre's accuracy has been in making their predictions. Some schools underpredict, some schools overpredict. And it's possible for us to actually, examine that through data. And I think doing that before the event is what should have happened last year. Now, and that wouldn't have been perfect, of course not, but it would have been a hell of a lot better than what we ended up with, or what was proposed. It seems to me, and I mean, work needs to be done on this because it's complex. I can't, sit in my study bedroom in York and say this is easy. It's not. But it is certainly possible to look at what evidence schools can give and how that evidence can be structured, used, and then standardized and moderated around levels of disruption experienced against what potential students have demonstrated. Because some students will have been able to demonstrate much, much more, some students much, much less because of the levels of disruption. But that can certainly be quantified against what that disruption has been. And it seems that there's a lot of work that could be being done in that. And it requires some resource investment, but somebody should be working on that.
I mean, we've also got the problem, of course, that a lot of schools gear their whole curriculum and school year and everything around exams. And it's very difficult to sort of move away from that in any sense of the word at all. And especially to be fair to children and to be equal to what other schools perhaps could do at the drop of a hat, you know, that they could perhaps turn around and do things differently quite easily. I don't know. What do you think will happen? What would you like to happen?
What I think will happen, I have no hope. What I think will happen is I think they will not do the work that is required. I think they will say exams are going to go ahead, and one of two things will happen. Either exams will not be able to go ahead, so that we will end up like in the same place we were last year, or the exams will go ahead. It will be appalling on the most disadvantaged kids. There will be a huge stink about it, and they may or they may not do, as you were suggesting, and try to come up with something to mop that up after the event. What will almost definitely happen is there's going to be lack of confidence in the whole system, which will feed into the arguments of those who are just completely opposed to any form of examination at all. And the whole thing will just be more polarizing and dreadful. That's what I think will happen. That's not what I want to happen. What I want to happen is that the DFE will see, gosh, that Ros McMullen blog was good. And that won't happen, by the way. But it would be great if it did. Why don't we put together some people who can really, some big brains who can really, really think about this? Let's come up with a plan B, a plan C. Let's consider some alternatives. And by, February, because I think that's the earliest we could possibly do this now, we have some real, proper, robust responses to if exams can't go ahead. And even if they do, these are the things we're going to do to make it more equitable.
Now, you are I think, a supporter of the Labour Party now.
Well, I've got a checkered history with the Labour Party, Martin.
That's why I'm putting ... there. Now, ... question mark. Do you know what the policy of the Labour Party is at the moment on exams?
No. I think it's, exams should go ahead is probably, I think, where they're at. I haven't seen any particular thinking around this area. I might have missed it, but I don't.
Okay, well, it's an ugly connection, perhaps, to what Kate Green said this morning. Kate Green being the opposition, the spokesperson on education. She said education in this country, England that being, has become a bit joyless as a result of a narrow national curriculum, which is information heavy and traditionalist. Now, I don't think, from what I know, that you've actually read all the article that came out in this morning's Times Education supplement, but just for that little snapshot there, do you have any reaction?
It looks to me as if it's a statement as a result of talking to a narrow group of people, and that Kate needs to talk to a wider group of people and needs to understand the issues in a little more depth. I mean, I read the headlines and I just thought, I can't face even reading that.
So, are both parties failing the educationalists, if you like, because they're listening either to a narrow number of people or not engaging with the profession in any meaningful way over times of trouble, times of crisis, let alone normal times?
I think the problem, Martin, is, as I said earlier, is that people get into camps and the camps aren't helpful. So, for instance, I'm a very strong believer in a knowledge-rich curriculum. And I think, people know that. That's one of the things that I'm very keen on. And yet I'm of the centre left. People assume that if you believe in that you're from the right. Now, this polarisation of calling people progressives and traditionalists is singularly unhelpful. I always like to say I'm a Prad or a Trog, because the polarisation is not in any sense helpful. And then what happens is, because they polarize this into left and right, which is completely wrong, completely and utterly wrong, what happens is they talk to people who they think are like them. So one of the problems that we have with the current crop of ministers is they only talk to people who they perceive to be, one of us in the Nick Gibb fan club or whatever. And it's really, really unhelpful, because actually it means that some of the best ideas become an anathema to people. And I suspect, I don't know, but I suspect, and it looks very much as if Kate Green may be making exactly the same mistake from the other angle. And it's just horrendous, really. And I'm very, very cross with this government for only talking to a very, very narrow range of people. It makes no sense, and it's how they get in all the mess that they get into.
Yeah, it's interesting how progressive education also doesn't belong to a narrow range of people on the left. I mean, this book here, Steve Hilton, who's now, I think, literally trumpeting around in America, supporting Trump in all his shenanigans, and sort of, I think it's on Fox. I think he works on Fox. I'm not entirely sure about that, but used to be an advisor, the previous advisor, the sort of Dominic Cummings for David Cameron. Yet that book there, More Human, has a huge amount of ideas about progressive education that you wouldn't put a feather between that and Ken Robinson on lots of things. So
yeah.
It's quite extraordinary. So it doesn't necessarily fall into these easy.
No, absolutely.
At all, does it?
Absolutely, it doesn't. Absolutely, it doesn't. And I mean, I suspect that education Twitter doesn't help. These sort of, well, it's not 180 characters anymore, is it? It's 240 we get these days. But it doesn't help because when you're trying to express an opinion in such a short period of time, you do tend to sort of really narrow it down to make a point, and then people get to camp. And I am so tired of telling people off for being in camps, because it's not helpful. Things are, and actually as educators, we need to know that things are complex, that things are nuanced, that things need to be contextualized more, that people need to understand, issues in much, much greater depth, and people need to be working together to solve problems. I just find it appalling, really. I just find it appalling. And unfortunately, it just plays beautifully into the hands of politicians who are not experts in these fields, but like to think that they are.
Yeah, and it's how to engage the profession in ways of actually giving some power to the profession in important ways. And like you say, it's not necessarily the best time in the middle of a crisis to look for longer term solutions, but there are obviously longer term issues here. And just on the Twitter thing, I mean, we all sort of indulge in Twitter and suffer through Twitter as well. And perhaps the world is to some extent the way it is now because of social media and because of the difficulties of communicating. We communicate more, but do we communicate better? And hopefully this program here that we're putting together, this YouTube extravaganza, is sort of helping expand the debate a bit and listening to more voices from different sides, and perhaps listening more to nuance and to what people really have to say behind the 280 characters or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah, one would hope so. I mean, I have to be really quite careful not to go down black holes in Twitter. I don't get involved. I try very hard not to. I don't think I do actually get involved in Twitter spats. I sometimes talk to people from IBM to tell them not to. And try to encourage some better behaviour, generally speaking. I think it's an interesting one, isn't it, about social media? Because to some extent, it is much better that people can blog, as I've done on this issue, and then people can read that, and they're getting more of more riches. I've certainly learned loads from blogs that other people have written. I mean, I came to your work, Martin, through Twitter, and that was hugely useful to me as a head teacher in my schools. What I suspect is that a lot of people don't do that reading of the blogs, don't do that deeper dive into where Twitter's trying to lead, but just look at some of the headlines. So it's kind of difficult to know whether it is giving access to that deeper stuff or whether it's just encouraging people into camp. And I mean, certainly how we use Twitter is something that is worthy of a lot of discussion.
It is indeed, and it's beyond just edu Twitter. Of course, it's worldwide, and
I'm sure that's true. I tend to only really follow the edu Twitter. Oh, and not politics. I mean, as you probably know from my Twitter stream, I'm very quite a political person.
But it is intense, and perhaps these are things that are being reflected in Twitter that are more worldwide. That there are at the moment big issues that are being sort of discussed and fought over worldwide on various things, and people are perhaps in camps not because of Twitter, but Twitter sort of exacerbates it. I do not know, but like you say, perhaps there's a thesis there certainly to be written by somebody, and I'm sure many are being written at this very minute in universities, and PhDs and MAs and MSCs are being done, scratching away, someone in some darkened room somewhere, and will give us all the answers over this, hopefully.
Well, it would be fascinating actually to do some deep research into whether Twitter has exacerbated camp mentality or is merely reflecting it. I suspect it's exacerbating it, but research is required.
Well, Ros, it's been joyful on this grim day to talk to you and seeing you so well and doing a lot of great things. I think we just need to remind everyone about Head Start again. Headrest, Head Start. What am I about? I'll say that again. Headrest. And there's the number up there and the website for people to get in touch. Ros, been lovely to talk to you. I hope you have, I'm going to say hope you have a good rest over the holiday period, and I'm not going to say Christmas because it's too early to say Christmas and we don't even know what that is going to be like, but at some point it'll be good to meet up with you in the real world, hopefully sometime next year. And thank you for your kind words about what we're doing here and for my work as well, but all power to your elbow. And
thanks very much, Martin. It's been lovely to talk to you.
And you. See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.